Bukola.
Yes, indeed, a very productive conversation by every level, something that we could expand and, of course, explore again in the near future. But from there, let's head to another equally important conversation. What is the value of polls that test and showcase voter pulse and sentiment ahead of the elections? How does it significantly impact on voter outcomes and indeed results of the elections when the elections actually take place? Very important conversation, especially with a history of what polls have said as against what have actually played out at the elections. Let's have this next conversation on a certain voter poll survey that has been carried out by SBM Intelligence. And joining us this morning on the program is Mr. Ikemesit. I hope I get his name correctly. Ikemesit. Yes, thank you, Jeffrey and Kelly. Mr. Ikemesit Effiong, Managing Partner, SBM Intelligence. He's right here in our Lagos studio. Mr. Effiong, good morning and welcome to the Morning Brief.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Before we begin to explore the details of the poll carried out by your organization, I'd like you to talk to us about your organization, because it's also part of the conversation. When you recall the polls that were carried out ahead of the 2023 election, the identity of the organization also came into the conversation somewhere along the line with questions around the interest of the organization. So let's start from there. Who is SBM Intelligence and what's the interest?
So SBM Intelligence is a geopolitical risk advisory. We use data and research, mostly socioeconomic research, right, to advise clients, but we also do a lot of public reporting, right, that the general public consumes around key aspects of Nigeria and increasingly West Africa's socioeconomic situation. We have a well-followed, for example, cost of living report, the Jollof Index, that we've been publishing since 2015, right, and the likes. We've done rankings of, for example, public health preparedness, ranking each Nigerian state in our health preparedness index. So we have a lot of sort of well-regarded and well-followed reports, including by the media, right?
And so what's the interest this time around on voter sentiment ahead of 2027?
Well, it's something we've done in past cycles, right? I'm an avid follower, right, of your show. I watch it every morning, right? And I know that you have a Rolodex of politicians, political actors, people who are interested in the elections and asking Nigerians to put their faith in them. Right, and those conversations in the lead up to 2027 are all good and relevant, but we felt it would be good to add a quantitative understanding that basically just picks the pulse of Nigerians themselves about how they're feeling about the general state of the country, what they think about the candidate choices on offer, and what issues they think are the most important issues that will shape their choices come January 2027. So that's why we put together the voter sentiment tracker. We've done the first wave. We hope to do a couple more in the lead up to the elections, and it's basically to track the headspace of Nigerians as developments such as Oriri and the various party primaries and other key national, governing items sort of shift and potentially change, people's perceptions of how the polity is doing and which sort of candidates they feel are best placed to take Nigeria forward.
So let's delve into that report. I imagine that issues around insecurity and the economy perhaps would have dominated what Nigerians are saying. Tell us about it.
Yes, they did, right. So according to the voter sentiment tracker, right, something like 45% of Nigerians say insecurity is their chief concern. And what's interesting is that we did this polling in late March into early April. So this actually predates Oriri, for example. So I would imagine that those numbers may be even higher right now. A further 30% of Nigerians say that the economy, right, is a major issue for them. So when you combine the twin pressures of insecurity and the economy, something like 70+%, almost 80% of Nigerians, right, say those are their chief concerns. right, in the lead up to the elections. What was also quite interesting was that that was consistent across geopolitical zones, across gender, demographics, across income, across age, right? Yeah, so there's, clear concurrency right across the country that insecurity and economy are the leading issues that are shaping how Nigerians will view, their ballot choice in 2027.
Absolutely. So I'm trying to get my producer to put up some of the numbers and the data so that we can appreciate what you're talking about, because the kind of data you put out can generate controversy, but the most important thing is that we're discussing it. So I want to read how Nigeria may vote is how you caption this particular one in your voter sentiment tracker. The rider in that sense is what I want to look at. The rider, hunger, insecurity, and political chaos grip Nigeria. SBM First voter survey shows Tinubu is weak, Obi is popular, but turnout will decide. Explain that liner for us.
Yeah, so what was clear, right, from the data, right, with the report was that...
You can also give us a sample size so that we have appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, sure, right.
Yes.
Okay, so we polled Nigerians in 8 states across all geopolitical zones and the Federal Capital Territory. So these 9 states and territories are the states that we've done the most polling and the most sampling for. They are our Jollof Index states. They are states where we've been collecting socioeconomic data of various kinds over the last 13 to 14 years. They are the states that we have the best understanding, right, for. In previous election cycles, we've done a complete nationwide service, right, where we've polled Nigerians in all of the 36 states as well as the Federal Capital Territory. We felt it would be good to get an indicative sense in the states that we have sort of the best understanding of what Nigerians, right, are thinking about with respect to the elections. So that's on the sample size. In terms of turnout, what our respondents, right, said in this report is that they are very motivated. So these are likely voters, people who have their PVCs, people who are above 18, people who are, legally empowered to vote, right, in this cycle. And what a lot of them are saying is that they intend to come out to vote. Now, as political researchers, right, we have the benefit of hindsight and experience. We had the recent off-cycle elections. We had the 2023 general elections. We had the 2019 elections. Turnout has been very low. So the fact that people are self-reporting that they are going to come out to vote is not in and of itself indicative of that reality actually panning out in 2027. So what we did with the report was we built out 2 likely scenarios. A high turnout scenario where the opposition is very competitive. The leading opposition candidate, Peter Obi's approval ratings are sky high, right, in that regard. And then a low turnout scenario, which not only in Nigeria, but right across the world, tends to favor incumbents. So even though the president's net favorability ratings, right, are low, and they're actually the lowest of all of the major candidates, right, who are running in this cycle, a low turnout scenario, right, still portends good for the APC and for the president. So those were the 2 scenarios we built out.
So you're saying that with a high turnout, the chances of the opposition upsetting the election is higher.
Yeah.
With a low turnout, the incumbents will hold sway.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
So, again, I return to past polls. The one conducted by ANAP ahead of the 2023 election allocated 23% to, at the time, the LP presidential candidate, about 13% to the incumbent, who, by the way, turned out to be victorious at the election, and then 10% to the candidate of the PDP at the time, Atiku Abubakar. So with the turnout of the actual polls, compared with this, what does it say about the integrity of the polls conducted by the agency, in this case yours, ANAP, or the integrity of the elections itself?
I'm not certain that. I'm not certain that polls should necessarily be used as a barometer to test the efficacy or the legitimacy of
An election.
Of the elections. Like I always like to put it, the ultimate poll is the election, right? Also, polls are a measure of a snapshot of people's understanding in time. That target is always a moving target, right? There are things we actually saw this, right, in the data gathering, for example, for the VST, where in the initial stages when there were conversations amongst all of the opposition parties around putting together a grand coalition. Peter Obi and Rabi Kwankwaso were still members of the ADC at the time. From our real-time data collection, the ADC was seen as the most favored party. But literally after what happened within the ADC, right, happened, and Peter Obi and Rabi Kwankwaso obviously left, that sentiment shifted. And I think that's something to recognize, right, on for your viewers, which is that polls shouldn't necessarily be seen as prophetic. Polls should be indicative of the level of work that current political actors have put into trying to convince Nigerians, and what essentially the mark or the passing grade or the grade, right, that Nigerians are allocating to various political leaders are, and that grade is likely to shift. There are so many things that happen during a political season, you don't need me to tell you that, obviously, right, that can move and shift sentiments. And so a poll, and that's why we plan to do this in waves, this is the first wave, right, can easily a candidate can easily rise and fall depending on the kind of developments, right, that are occurring at any given time.
So let me really follow up. So what in between the time, after the time that the poll had been conducted and the elections, what punctures the result of the polls that there's a surprising different outcome at the actual elections and what the polls tells us? What are the factors?
Well, so the key things would be, what are the issues that are animating Nigerians? And that's why we spent a significant amount of time, right, asking Nigerians what are the most important issues for you. Just to take another issue, right, for example, Nigerians are very concerned about the potential impact of artificial intelligence, right? We know that with the rise of misinformation, deep fakes out there, people using AI tools to create narratives that are obvious, that have the obvious effect, right, of shifting sentiment, the favorability ratings of candidates, the way Nigerians view political parties are likely to shift significantly. And Nigerians are increasingly taking to social media, right, as their primary source of news. According to our findings, 52% of Nigerians, right, have social media as their main source of news, right, followed by television and radio, although those are a significant distance behind. So those are sort of the critical things that I think, from my perspective, would be more interesting to look at. But obviously, politics is a contest. Everyone is looking at the names, the political parties, and the likes. But I think those are the things that will shape sentiments.
Yes, let's stay with this, the issue of let's stay with this map and then the issues around insecurity, Mr. Effiong, because I want to probe even further. You have said that, from what I've read, that in terms of payment of ransom, for instance, it has skyrocketed, I think, to about 750% between 2023 and 2025.
Yeah.
But the government will always say no ransom was paid. This is a Riri, for instance, they say no ransom was paid. And other ones, let's not go there. But because I know that you guys always spotlight issues, I remember I was doing a particular story around kidnappings and I had to reach out to you guys for data. What have you discovered? Because the government keeps saying we don't pay any ransom. But what are you seeing? What are your discovery?
Ransom payments are still a significant part, unfortunately, of Nigerians trying to secure the release of their loved ones. We have a report we publish every year called The Economics of Kidnapping Industry. And when we first published that, I believe in 2021, that was when we first realized that these ransom payments had reached near industrial levels. There's a level of sophistication and art that a lot of these groups have brought to play. And I think the conversation with the former assistant deputy director was very was very instructive in that regard. I understand the sentiments of the government in terms of not wanting to openly posture that these things actually, right, occur in order not to offer, an incentive to these groups. But the question that, organizations like ours, as well as others who do this work, would always ask is, if this activity was not as lucrative as it clearly is, we would not be seeing an escalation in the number of incidents, in the scope, in the breadth, right, of attacks, in the geographic, right, distribution, right, of attacks. There's no part of the country which has been spared the brunt of this. And the only logical explanation is that this is a very, very financially lucrative enterprise. It's worth noting that Orire is very unique in that the level of public interest and the level of government support at both the federal and the subnational level in terms of supporting the families to secure the release of their loved ones is atypical for most kidnapping incidents that we find in Nigeria. The vast majority of them go under the radar, or they are in the news spotlight for a very limited but for a very short amount of time, and the families essentially are left to fend for themselves. This is not to say that ransoms weren't paid, right? In this instance, it's still too early, right, to say in that regard. But it would be very, very surprising, right, that if ransoms weren't paid, at the very least for a majority, right, of incidents of this kind. And it would be very interesting that if it wasn't paid in this particular instance. Wow. But we're still speculating.
Indeed, a very expansive survey, more like a sponge absorbing many issues. I'm reading here that the NDC's vote share jumps from 32% in a low voter turnout scenario to 65% in a high turnout scenario. Yeah. And zones with high turnout intention is strongest. Southeast 87.4%, South 82.9%. If you're interested, you just may want to find it somewhere on Google, SBM Intelligence Voter Intention Survey, and then you get all of the details. I wish we could explore this particular one with you, but we must anchor at this point. And thank you for coming. We look forward to further conversations with you on other surveys carried out by your agency. Mr. Ikemesit Effiong is the managing partner, SBM Intelligence. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you very much for having me. Absolute pleasure.
And so we're not quite done yet with security-related issues, as we'll be having this next one on the state police subject coming up after this break. Join us again.